And again, welcome to our Abington colleagues who are live streaming into the presentation. And just another reminder that if you're on the live stream page and have clicked on the link, there is a way for you to email your questions to us through Mark Collins. So if you have a question, email it, and Mark will convey it. And then when we do the Q&A at the end, we will do our best to address your questions. So it's really fun for me to reintroduce to everyone here Evan Malone, Dr. Evan Malone, who is the founder of NextFab, which is a fabrication, prototyping, and makerspace at 20th and Washington. For those of you who participated in the hackathon and found yourself at NextFab, Evan and his folks were an important partner in that event. Banku, my partner in the hackathon, who's not here today, and I, we really wrestled with how many people were actually going to use fabrication services, and we really had no way of calibrating that based on who was going to show up. But at one point, I think we had like 80 people down at NextFab.
Over 100.
Yeah. So the hackathon, which was a tremendous success, was in part a tremendous success because we had the resources available through NextFab to be able to help people really crystallize their ideas in physical form, and that was pretty meaningful on a number of fronts. So just a word about Evan Malone, who's probably one of the smartest people I've ever met. This guy was building 3D printers like 20 years ago when he was in his doctoral program at, was it Princeton? Cornell, sorry, it was one of the Ivies. Anyway, so Evan, in addition to being pretty smart guy, pretty talented in the physical and in the physical world, is also a 3D thinker, which is why NextFab even exists. For those, how many people have been to NextFab? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. So those of you that have not been, let me just urge you, they do free tours, you can book them online. You got to see this place. When I first got acquainted with NextFab, and I was speaking to Dr. Klasko about it, I wanted him to meet Evan and get acquainted with the work that he was doing. And Steve said to me, can't I just meet him in my office? And I was like, no, you really can't. You really got to see this place. So he and John Acarius and I, with my colleague Robin Sheldon, we went down to NextFab, and once they got there, nobody wanted to leave. I think we were there for like 2 hours. It's pretty extraordinary. So for those of you who haven't been, make the trip. You won't be sorry. And so today we're going to have a presentation again from Evan to talk about not only what NextFab, what was the genesis of NextFab, but what it looks like now and what it looks like going forward. So with that, I want to welcome my friend and colleague, Evan Malone.
Thank you very much, Donna. Appreciate the friend moniker. That's great. One of my recollections of the hackathon with Jefferson was that people were so engrossed in what they were working on that it was, 8 or 9 p.m. We were on our 5th order of delivery pizza. We had, 18 or 20 pizzas that came through. So it was very intense, and people were really excited about it. I think we had a great experience all around. So thank you very much for working with us on that. So I'm going to introduce NextFab a little bit for those of you who have not been there. It's a starting point for my talk. So as Donna mentioned, NextFab is what's called a makerspace. Anybody not heard the word makerspace? Okay, good. It's kind of pretty well defined out in the public knowledge now. Makerspace and a hardware tech incubator. So it's a place you can come to use the tools yourself. We can teach you how to use them. But we're also very much focused on helping ideas turn into products and into businesses. So with that, we'll get started. So I started NextFab in 2008-ish, started getting serious about the concept. I was a little concerned about the economic downturn, if anybody remembers that. Coming from mechanical engineering, degree program, PhD, I was a little worried about, employment prospects for myself and my colleagues. I used to joke that a Russian friend of mine could probably get better pay in Iran than he could get in the US at that time because we were offshore outsourcing not just manufacturing labor, but also engineering and even R&D activities. And so it starts to erode away at something that seemed very fundamental to kind of a robust economy. So for that reason, I thought of like, what can we do to restart manufacturing in the United States, but take into account the fact that cost of labor is just higher here. We're not going to compete as sweatshop factory labor against Southeast Asia. So the idea was take a look at advanced manufacturing technology. This is computer-controlled tools, things like 3D printers, laser cutters, but even that sort of more old-school stuff called milling or turning, computer-controlled machines, though. And the idea is that you use your creativity and automated tools, then do the dark, dirty, dangerous bits of manufacturing, and we could focus on customized, high-value goods. And that's a competitive position for the United States to be in. So we developed a facility, developed this business model, and the idea is to build awareness of access to competence and commerce enabled by advanced manufacturing technology. And basically try to restart the innovation and manufacturing ecosystem. So this is what the floor plan of the South Philadelphia location looks like. We actually started in 2009, late 2009, in the University City Science Center in West Philadelphia, in a much smaller space. But anyway, this is 21,000 square feet. It's got basically everything. It's a one-stop shop for turning ideas into products and products into businesses. Wide variety of capabilities there. So what do I mean by digital design and manufacturing technologies, advanced manufacturing? So it's computer-aided design tools, wide variety for mechanical, electrical, industrial design, so on. Laser scanning, laser cutting, CNC machine tools, electronics, assembly tools, and prototyping tools, and also a lot of 3D printing capabilities. So my background was in 3D printing, so naturally I emphasized 3D printing a fair amount. So we have a wide variety, including something like 26 total machines for 3D printing. Quick peek inside the building. This is a couple of panorama shots of the metal shop. We have a 5-axis abrasive water jet cutters, kind of an exotic machine. You can see some CNC machine tools on the right, in the top, and on the left. Sorry, in the bottom on the left, you have manual machine tools. Behind the curtain, all sorts of welding technology, including some computer-controlled welding. The wood shop, wood is a kind of traditional artisan material, but it's also something you can work with computer-controlled tools. And there's a fair bit of economic activity rather in furniture and design. And so we support that with computer-controlled routers and then a lot of traditional machine tools for woodworking. Upstairs, we have 3D printing and laser cutting, wide variety of laser cutting tools. I mentioned lots of 3D printing, and also large format 2D printing, which helps you tackle the marketing side of what you're developing. You can make trade show displays, package labeling, and so on to showcase your product and demonstrate that it is viable and ready for market. Electronics is something else we've invested pretty heavily in. So we have automated tools that enable you to assemble batches of printed circuit boards with all the tiny, fussy little components that have to be placed exactly right, otherwise it doesn't work. So pick-and-place robots, a tunnel oven for basically soldering batches of boards simultaneously, and all the electronics design tools necessary to make something that's worth making. We also have recently opened, actually early, mid-2015, another location. We call this one a Spoke. It's 3,500 square feet, and it's in Northern Liberties, roughly, 4th and Girard. Basically has a full set of tools, and there are a couple of entrepreneurs working out of there as well, so it's more of a branch office. Neat thing, though, is it does have a deep capability in jewelry work, including using CNC machine tools and 3D printing for making casting patterns for complicated jewelry and wearable devices. We have a lot of experts on staff, about 30 employees now. I'm unfortunately having to contemplate ACA reporting now because we're getting, not just this company, but some other companies I'm involved with together, getting over 50 employees. So it triggers all sorts of pain. As an entrepreneur, it's very painful. Lots of investment in, overhead that doesn't produce, goods for people. But anyway, so we've got experts in, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, industrial design, welding and fabrication, woodworking, and so on. great depth of expertise, and that's on staff. But we also have a community of over 700 users, a lot of entrepreneurs as well, and that's sort of something that we couldn't possibly offer as staff. So these are people who have a wide variety of perspectives. It's an instant focus group if you have an idea for a product and you want to just get feedback on it. We also have entrepreneurs that are at various stages in developing their own business and products, and they can answer those questions for you so that you don't have to trip over the same stumbling blocks they did. And it's a very sort of open and sharing community. So that's a wonderful thing, and a lot of entrepreneurs that work with us talk about how it's like being part of IBM or Lockheed Martin or something like that, but without all the hassle, right? You have all the expertise, you have all the equipment and capabilities, but you don't have to deal with all the overhead and the red tape. Just a quick peek at our services. The idea is we're trying to help people, regardless of where they're coming into this space of design, manufacturing, and so on, advance a rung on this ladder. So from total unawareness of what the technologies and capabilities are to awareness. Basically come in, see the facility, see some demonstrations of equipment, maybe take a workshop where you get to do something hands-on. And then we provide access to people who are sure they want to be doing this, basically like a fitness gym. Come in and use the tools. We'll teach you how, keep you safe, and help you find collaborators to tackle the project you're working on. We have a wide variety of training programs that help you, master the skills you need to be efficient and safe on the equipment. And then we also have service work. So if you have a product idea you're working on, but you don't have the bandwidth, as I imagine a lot of people here who are pursuing degrees or full-time, healthcare practitioners can relate to, but you have a great idea because of your domain expertise, you can work with us and we will help you develop that idea into a product prototype and maybe do a pilot production run. We can even connect you into manufacturing supply chain. And we also host startup companies directly in our Washington Avenue facility. So we have private office space and an incubator curriculum that we work people through. A couple of product development examples on the top, custom light fixtures, 3D printed shades in the left, in the CAD model, in the middle, in the 3D printer coming out, and on the right, as installed and UL certified for this commercial application in a wine bar. Lower left, a medical device out of UPenn, boo. But cool technology, basically detect onset of hemorrhagic shock through optoelectronic means. And then the version on the right is one that we converted into a portable clinical trial ready version. A few other things, wide variety, from kind of models and demonstration units to trade show versions of technology, the upper right, laser nano tweezer system that we kind of mobilized for a startup company. Lower right, an event activity for Heineken Dos Equis, something where people can hurt themselves. It's a lumberjack log roll display where they climb on top and actually try to knock each other off. We did put mattresses and everything. The intent obviously was not for them to hurt themselves, but we did have to deal with all sorts of liability concerns when we produced that for them. Pretty neat companies come through us. Some have already graduated. Biomeme and BioBots are pretty neat companies that have graduated. Biomeme is a portable quantitative PCR device, basically smartphone powered, little battery operated thermal cycler, and sample prep kits. They're doing well. They're staying in Philadelphia. This is another great story. Because of Dream It Accelerator, because of the eds and meds resources in this region, and because of NextFab, if I can take some credit, Biomeme relocated to Philadelphia from New Mexico, and they've decided to stay here, and they're growing, and they're located in Northern Liberties as well, on Nerd Street. BioBots, some Penn students, again, boo. But doing great, basically 3D printing of living materials, biological materials, so you can make engineered organs, replacement organs, maybe with the patient's own cell type and not have to deal with rejection and immunosuppression issues. So, cool stuff. We're tied into regional manufacturing assets, as I mentioned. Ben Franklin Tech Partners is a great source of a lot of assistance for startup companies. They have a FabNet seed grant program, which is worth knowing about it if you're contemplating starting a business or developing a product. It's basically a one-to-one matching grant up to $5,000 that they'll grant you for efforts to advance a concept towards commercialization. And that's for work done at one of the FabNet regional partners. So NextFab is one, there are several others. They also have kind of a ramp of investment opportunities available, some convertible notes, some straight up equity stakes. So great to know about. And NextFab has also taken equity in companies on occasion. So look out for us too. That's it for NextFab. So I will now start with the main program. So the idea behind this presentation is to walk through kind of some of the pitfalls I've observed in engineers eager to kind of pursue a technological idea that they get really passionate about, and then thinking they can turn it into a product without kind of realizing they have to consider if somebody wants to buy that or not. And the flip side is some great market ideas that never kind of get challenged on the technological side. People maybe learn too late that a competing product exists, or that there are some barriers or some reason why a product doesn't exist in that space. So the idea here is to walk through a kind of a structured process from concept to prototype, and kind of point the way towards where you would go to set up a company after this. All right. So this is based on something I studied during my PhD program, which is called Systems Engineering, Master's and PhD, both in those. And this is something that aerospace, defense contractors developed for managing the big, complicated projects like making an aircraft carrier or a new, sort of fighter aircraft. A lot of complicated stuff, a lot of very, difficult to meet requirements and so on. A lot of pressure on budget and time. So this process helps kind of organize the approach. And then this is my sort of spin on that very heavyweight approach for more of an entrepreneurial activity. So it all starts, where's the laser pointer? Is it in the middle? Okay. All starts with either an idea or a need, and then you kind of work through steps of developing some potential solutions, taking a look at the marketplace and the intellectual property space and so on. And there's just iteration at each of these steps. We're going to walk through this in more detail. But the idea is that through this, you kind of avoid some of the pitfalls that would prevent you from investing, that would cause you to find out too late that you'd invested in the wrong direction, maybe started production and realized too late that something else was already out there solving that problem. So typically start with either an idea or a need. So what are some examples? An idea might be, I have this really cool technology and I just want to do something with it. And that's very common for technical people. They get passionate about technology. A different example might be you're in a healthcare space and you know that patients suffer or struggle with a situation that the healthcare providers just can't currently meet, and you have maybe some sense that there's a gap that could be met there, or a gap that could be filled with a product. So whether you start with the idea or the need, you kind of need to have both before you take another step. So if you have a need, you need to come up with some potential ideas that could meet the need, and if you have the idea, you need to make sure there's a market or a need for it. Right? So you iterate through this process a little bit, try to identify a few potential solutions. Here's an example. So I'm going to include for you a toy case study. It's not an actual kind of marketed product, but something that NextFab put together for a demonstration for Philly Tech Week a couple years ago. But the idea is we needed something that we could demonstrate for an event in Philly Tech Week. And we wanted to make sure that engaged audience of tech enthusiasts. So that was a need. Inside our company, we had to develop something for this. And we came up with some random candidate solutions just by talking to people. Motion-activated garden lights, maybe a clip-on bicycle horn. Somebody even suggested a sewing thimble with an alarm that would beep when the needle got too close. We rejected that one as silly. And then after this discussion, somebody came up with a cool idea, a technology-driven idea, which was, let's combine LED lighting and thick slabs of material, because we had these technologies. WaterJet can cut thick slabs of material. We have electronics. We can prototype lighting. Those are both cool things we want to demonstrate. So then we ended up in an idea. We haven't kind of closed the loop yet. Next step, let's come back around. So let's try an idea based on that, cutting slabs of material and working with LEDs, some candidate solutions. 7-segment LED house number, alarm clock, and we'll throw out those other two because they're not meeting with this idea anymore. In the end, we elected to do the house numbers. Basically, there are a lot of alarm clocks available, and we thought this was a little cooler, something you could showcase your nerdiness by having on exterior house, LED programmable house numbers that could even scroll a message if you wanted. So, next step is to explore those concepts. So, what's a way you might explore a concept before you're actually ready to produce it? Any suggestions? Shout it out. Mock-up, yep. Yep. Exactly right. And why would you want to do that? Exactly right. Cheap and easy, and it helps you explain to a potential customer, what this idea is, and get feedback from them. Because at this stage in the game, it's all about getting useful feedback from potential customers and seeing if they'd be willing to buy this thing that you're talking about. So we do this, recommended ways. You can do it however you want to do it, but sketching and mock-ups. So these are very low-cost, very adaptable ways of producing kind of quick versions or iterations. So here's some examples for what I talked about before, the house numbers concept. So sketches, I said LED house numbers. I don't know if anybody had a clear sense of what I was talking about, but maybe at this point you can start to see it. So we got a thick slab of material here, cut out, kind of looks like, digital numbers, and then back here we've got some electronics and LEDs. So we kind of actually addressed some of how we might make this as well as just capturing the concept. A few other versions. Industrial design team had some fun with this, something inspired by, living things, plants, make it more organic material. Here's more of a hard industrial version or more blocky. A few other samples, thinking about how we would assemble it. All right, so now that we have those mock-ups, we need to actually get some feedback from the world about whether it cares. And, if you're trying to launch a business, the caring should mean willing to pay for, and enough people. So primarily what we're doing at this point is thinking about the scale of a marketplace. How many people are out there? And you can do this sort of as a thought experiment with a little Googling for answers. How many people are in this particular, group that I'm trying to address? You identify the addressable market. That's what that means. So they have the interest or they have the need that I'm trying to solve. What would it be worth to them? You have to know a little bit about their income levels and what they could afford to spend on something like this, or what maybe a third-party payer would be willing to spend on it. Some urgency, if it's super urgent, you can get a premium, and it can justify a more kind of complicated product. Aesthetics, all sorts of other things you get from interviewing people, from researching online, gathering data. You have to understand the context out there. Again, don't jump into it until you're sure that somebody else isn't already solving it. And if they are, it doesn't mean it's the end of the road. You can do a better job than them. You can study what they did wrong. But there might be patents and intellectual property. You might be able to work around those or license them. So there's just good to know, right? You want to stare it right in the face. Then you also want to take a look at what barriers might be out there. So say there is nothing in the marketplace yet. You need to understand, that there might be reasons why. And that could be things like regulatory barriers or technical challenges or some other cultural factors, like certain cultures just won't use certain types of products. It's just not in their culture. So after this, you've had an opportunity to study, the circumstances, the market, and so on, and you can throw out some of your maybe not so good ideas, at least the ones that are not suitable for this application. In our case, we just interviewed some, staff members, and we also talked to some of our customers and said what would be cool and interesting, and what features would you find interesting for us to demonstrate in this particular program for Philly Tech Week. All right, next up, we need to gather and classify our requirements. This is a little more hard-nosed, like spreadsheet work here. So we're pretty confident we want to proceed with a certain idea. We've gotten feedback on some different concepts based on our mock-ups and our sketches. And we've got some now feasible solutions that seem to pass the, the sanity test against, intellectual property, market demand, and so on. So we need to figure out the requirements for the development project. We want to turn this idea into something tangible. So we need to understand what's the budget, what's driving our budget. Is there a competitor that might be racing us to the marketplace? That's a schedule constraint. Maybe you have just limited time and resource to pursue this. You need to understand the budget that you have available. So what's your financing, friends and family, out of pocket, begging, who knows, maybe a grant. And then there's all sorts of technical requirements. So you understand, if it's going to satisfy the need, the customers have told you it has to be lightweight. I need the batteries to last, 36 hours before charging again, that kind of thing. So you need to write all those down, ideally quantitatively. And then you also need to understand what stipulated requirements might be out there. And these are things that you just have to live with, even though they're not really about making a better product. They're just, government said so, or somebody else just said so, and you have to live with it. Tabulate all those. And the reason you want to have all these is that you're going to get really head down into the product development process. When you come up again, you need to make sure that what you produced is actually matching what you needed to produce. And this is your checklist for that. So it's pretty easy to get distracted by solving the technical challenges associated with developing a product and lose sight of the market, the need, all those other pieces of information that came along before. So in our case, this toy problem didn't have a very great example for requirements again. We know that we had 60 minutes that we wanted to present this thing in. We had to demonstrate several pieces of technology. We wanted to be engaging. Thought I had a slide on that. Oh, anyway, so now we're defining effectiveness measures. I think we'll come back to that in a minute. So we're defining effectiveness measures. We've got some requirements. The effectiveness measures are going to give us a sense of how well we're doing at solving those or meeting those requirements. Some of those are cost of components associated with the structure. Step back. There's three different classifications of those requirements: structural, behavioral, and stipulated. Okay? Structural requirements are basically what goes into making the product, the physical components of it. Behavioral are how it behaves, like its user interface or the user experience it generates. And then stipulated are the ones that are about compliance, basically, in this classification anyway. So structural includes cost of components, overall size, battery life, that kind of thing. Behavioral, response time. If I hit the button, how long do I have to wait before I get my answer? How accurate is the device, if it's a device, so on. Stipulated, performance requirement is agency will approve this, right? If the agency didn't approve it, then I didn't, satisfy this effectiveness measure. Focus groups like the shape, et cetera. All right, so for us, the effectiveness measures are the device can at least display one address, and that's the address of our location. The device looks good to the project team, focus group that says they like the aesthetics of it. The device would make an interesting case study for Philly Tech Week event. So how do we assess that? Right? This isn't a well-defined one. We need to actually come up with a metric, right? So we should probably do a survey of participants in that event. Just an example, you can throw something out there. It might not be one that you can actually validate unless you actually perform some surveys or gather some other information. Lastly, from our original idea, we wanted to make sure the device uses a slab of stone and LEDs. So those are pretty easy to test. So what's a behavioral model look like? So it's basically a set, like a flow chart, in essence is the easiest way to describe it. One event happens, the device is supposed to do something within a certain set of constraints, and then provides feedback to the user potentially, and then the user can take another action. You can follow a path through this flow chart. So there's a wide variety. You might end up with multiple flow charts, different modes of behavior, particularly for electronic device, medical device. And again, documenting this is about defining both the physical interaction with the device and also the brains, if there are brains involved, the programming that will drive the device. So some examples of behavior model for our LED house numbers. Basically, it needs to be able to be securely screwed to a wall. We need to be able to power it on and off. So if I hit the on switch, it turns on. LED lights need to be able to display the address number when it's powered on. I need to be able to take it off the wall to reprogram it or change, or at least I need to be able to reprogram it or change the numbers that are shown. So those are some examples, and then we could talk about breaking each of these down into a set of steps, right? User takes thing off wall, user flip switch, device responds by powering on, device illuminates LEDs to configure, the number, that kind of thing. Structural model is basically going to lead to your bill of materials and sort of like have you ever seen an exploded chart? Like in the back of your new vacuum cleaner manual, when you get it, it has like a parts list and it's just all, CAD model that's exploded with lines connecting the parts together. That's in essence what you're building here. You want to make sure you know every part, where it goes, how many you need, and this is also the key to setting up your manufacturing process. You won't necessarily start with your prototype structural model to get to manufacturing, but it's a great time saver. You can hand that off to a manufacturing partner. They can say, yes, we can do that one that way, but these we're going to produce a different way. And we know we need these components to build the complete thing. So in this case, we have a device. Oops, what did I do? There we go. We have a device, just sort of a straw man example. It has an input unit. The input unit has a sensor. We have a compute unit, could be the CPU. We have an output unit, which could be the screen, or it could be a motor, an actuator, so on. So this is just basically a tree that demonstrates all the components, how many you need, and so on. Some concrete examples. So for the house numbers, structural model could be a schematic of the electronics, basically showing how many parts you need and how they're connected. For the mechanical components, it could be a 3D CAD model showing different parts. Or it could be a 2D CAD model that's something that displays plans for manufacturing different parts. So these are different elements of a structural model. Here's a full assembled 3D CAD model of the house numbers. So you can see, by looking at this, you can see where every part goes, and this is a great way to build that exploded view, which is a great tool for explaining the assembly process. So now we have the step of actually building something and testing it. So we can't necessarily go from idea right to making something, at least not safely. So prototyping is an essential step to resolve some uncertainties between our analytical model, the model in our brain, the model in our spreadsheet, the model in our computer simulation, and the real world, because no simulation or no mental model is completely accurate. So the prototype is something that represents the majority of, or a significant component of what you're trying to achieve, but doesn't have to represent all of it. It's not, maybe not the final materials, not the final manufacturing process. But it looks right, it works largely the way you want it to work, and it's something you can get to customers and validate that it does meet their need. So you would start typically with building a prototype. You would make sure that it satisfies your effectiveness measures. If it doesn't, you analyze the results. Why didn't it? What failed? Go back and revise your models, and then keep iterating on this until you've satisfied all your effectiveness measures, or you've modified them until you're satisfied. And here, ta-da, is your solution. All right. So with CAD, you can get pretty far with virtual prototyping. You can get very detailed dimensions, very realistic renderings, as you're seeing here. And that can do a lot, but you still end up needing to build something at some point. Electrical prototype is typically ugly like this, and not usually something you want to showcase too much, but you can stick it in a black box and have people interact with it and make sure that the timings you've set up and the types of interactions that are generated are what you're going for. A few steps in how this is done. You can prototype PCBs very inexpensively. Typically, you would end up sending out for prototype circuit boards. But imagine, 1 to 2 weeks for a reasonable budget, maybe a couple $100 for a few boards. Very achievable these days. Mechanical prototypes, these are basically the physical parts that are going to wrap the electronics in this particular product. So we have some stone. We actually water jet cut. We're lucky to have a water jet cutter we can prototype with. some medium density fiberboard, MDF, basically wood product as the back plate of this with some holes for buttons and so on. So we actually did several versions of these, didn't like certain aspects of certain ones, or goofed on the fabrication steps, had to redo it. So some details are hidden there. Software prototype. This is something that you can, there's a plethora of tools available these days to very quickly prototype behavior, especially for smart devices. So Arduino is a very popular platform for programming electronics to behave in a certain way. This was a very easy one to program, around 200 lines of code. It probably took maybe 16 hours of programmer time to do this. Really easy to change the design. It's not necessarily a platform you would want to mass produce around, though, so it's good for the prototyping phase. All right. Electrical assembly, I mentioned, is another process step that we can perform at NextFab. And the idea here is that basically we're soldering parts onto the board. We can do this in small and medium scale. Again, you wouldn't necessarily go to mass production using the exact prototype designs, but you can get to significant pilot scale and get a lot of feedback from customers. Selling tens to hundreds of units before you commit to the 10,000, 100,000 million unit scale. And here's a quick view of this particular prototype project from start to finish. There you go. And we were able to talk about it in 60 minutes, so I actually do it in 60 minutes. But we demonstrated the steps. Anyway, so that was just a toy model to kind of walk you through some of the steps here. Worth noting, from a lot of big project engineering experience, there's something called the 70-30 rule. Everybody's got 70-30, 60-40, 80-20 rules. This is a 70-30 rule, which you see only approximately applies, but the point is that you should spend as much time as possible in the early stages of developing a concept because the cost of changes goes up dramatically as you get further into the effort. In particular, if you imagine once you're ready to scale up to large volume manufacturing, you've put a lot of effort into this. You've contacted manufacturers. You've gotten quotations. They've started to produce custom configurations of their manufacturing equipment to produce your work. You're investing money up front for that, or they're financing it, and you have a contract with them. And all of a sudden you decide you need to change something significant. So they have to remake that tooling or whatever it is. It's very costly at that point, or your product's out in the marketplace. It's in somebody's body, and something goes wrong, right? So, I'm sure I don't have to tell you about the costs there. So, to the extent you can catch that stuff in the earlier phases, you save yourself a lot of pain later on. So that's the value of the design effort, the analysis effort, the market studies, and the prototyping and testing phases before you actually commit to production. So here's another little mini case study, which I'm hoping to eventually build into this full talk. But TowerView Health is a company that's another Dream It Health accelerator company. They came from Duke University. Can I say, should it be boo or yay? I don't know. Yay? Okay. Okay, great. But they came to Philadelphia for Dream It Health Accelerator and have stayed, and they work out of NextFab, and we're incubating them as they continue to grow. So they have a product which basically is a smart pillbox. But how did they get here? And well, the first couple steps of the process, they started with a need. In this case, their need was a friend of theirs actually ended up with, I think, leukemia. And the friend, who was an undergraduate student at Duke University and I think considered himself to be intelligent, struggled to manage his medications. Just so many different schedules and so on. And they sort of instantly saw that there was a need that probably was beyond just their one friend, and it seemed like something that was worth trying to solve. So they considered some potential solutions. One, could you maybe custom compound for each patient to reduce the number of pills and schedules and so on? Could you, come up with better patient education to streamline this, or maybe some documentation you could provide would simplify it. Third idea, the smart pillbox idea, something they eventually came around to. And the idea that came out of this was that it was very important to let healthcare providers know about deviations in patient medication schedules, as well as helping the patient manage their own medication. So those two things work in synergy. So the original concept for one component of this is that there's a tray. You can see here, there's a tray in their product. The idea was that it would be an empty tray and this device that monitors whether patients have removed pills from the tray, little bins. And the patient would get their medications, and then they would fill the tray on a regular basis. And then they would take the medications from the tray. Challenges there after some stakeholder meetings and some discussions and some testing. Basically, that did not reduce the risk of error sufficiently, and it does not address a significant concern around vision and dexterity for elderly patients in particular. Just handling pill bottles and pulling individual pills out and seeing which slot they should go into is a significant challenge. So because of that information, they came up with a pretty significant change to their concept, which is that pharmacies can fill the trays and deliver them for the patients. Now, you couldn't just sort of guess that this would be feasible. They actually had to go in and discuss with pharmacies and make sure that was viable, and they actually had to discuss with insurers as well. But that all emerged from their assessing available information in the marketplace, getting stakeholder feedback and so on, and they discovered this as an option, and now it's a kind of a pretty neat component of their business model. So it's like the razor blades for their razor. They have the tray's an interface, the housing, the smart pillbox, and now the trays are sort of a constant annuity they can get revenue from going downstream for every patient. So pretty neat product, pretty cool company, and they haven't actually used my system for their product development process, but they've done a pretty nice job, and I think there's lessons to be learned that can be kind of pulled into this plan over time. So once you've got your prototype, you've gone through a lot of this, is it time to start the business? No. You probably should be working on that in parallel from the start. There's a lot of information that flows from the business consideration side to the product development side. And you have to kind of manage this very complicated process of assessing the market, finding financing, considering what the regulatory hurdles might be, as well as product development, technical challenges, and so on. And that's why it's generally recommended there should be at least 2 people in a founder team, one with business experience, one with technical experience. And they have to be really tight so they can kind of manage the flow of information from these 2 sides. But in short, there's a lot of steps after this. There are accelerator programs that can help you walk through this. In fact, they will shove you through it at an accelerated rate, typically 3 months, drinking from a fire hose. And then there are incubator programs like the one at NextFab, which is, after you're pretty confident that you want to continue investing in your idea, it's a more stately pace, 9 to 18 months. And we help you kind of manage the growth, maturity of the product from prototyping into manufacturing scale. All right. Thank you very much.
So we're going to do some questions and answers. Mark, do we have anything you want to add in yet? Okay. So first of all, I just want to comment on one observation. I've been a frequent, as Evan can tell you, frequent visitor to NextFab for a whole bunch of different reasons. But my absolute favorite visit was the day I walked in and saw the construction of the pink flamingos. How big were they? 30-something feet?
25 feet tall for the tall one.
Yeah.
And then the one with the head down is more like 18 feet.
Yeah, this was a special project that some artist in New York had cooked up that they wanted to put into their backyard in Brooklyn. Wouldn't you love to live next door to that guy? So, and they were there for a while.
They're still in storage.
They're still there.
They're done, but he struggled a little bit. So he's a tenant in this rental house, right? So. Right. He had to get landlord approval to do some significant engineering work in the backyard, pouring a foundation basically to hold these. So, I mean, they're big, 26, like an 800-pound, 26-foot tall flamingo could cause some damage.
Yeah.
So,
They may end up having to find a home here in Philly.
Yeah.
So let us know. It would be a great campus location,
It would
I'm
be.
sure, for pink flamingos. Anybody have any questions for Evan?
yes, go ahead.
So, what do you see as the biggest sort of strategic point that people fail at? Is it the early stage where they're not doing the assessments, or is it the later stage where they're not doing the structural design? Sort of, where's the really hard thing that people struggle with?
Well, I would say it's the challenge is typically in the first couple steps. As I mentioned, the technologist who's passionate and runs away with this idea and has if you're lucky, a partially formed sense of what a need might be, and they invest tons of time and money in developing a product, and it's just not right. It doesn't, nobody wants it. It's got some fatal flaw, or it's already patented, or whatever. So that's one major hurdle. The other one is, I think, just not assessing the marketplace well. So understanding, again, the intellectual property environment. Maybe sometimes giving up when you realize that there is a solution already on the marketplace and not taking a close look and saying, could I do it better, and could I license IP from someone? So it takes, you have to be aware that you can do that you can approach somebody and they may be willing to license intellectual property for that, or they might be willing to license it in a different domain or different market segment than they're currently serving. So those are the key stops.
Yeah. Speaking of circuit boards, is there any place in the Philly area that has an electronics pad for doing like vapor deposition or other Silicon Valley type operations?
Chemical vapor deposition to make ICs, you mean?
Yes.
I don't have a straight answer for you. I would guess for integrated circuit manufacturing, you're probably, or prototyping, you're talking UPenn or Drexel, or I think Temple is investing in new nano fabrication as well. But Penn and Drexel both have microfabrication facilities. And I think you can get access to those.
Open to startup access?
They are. There's a decent amount of training and operator expense, or I guess fees for use of the equipment.
Right.
But yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, engineers don't necessarily have a great sense of aesthetics. Some do. But the question was, how do you teach aesthetics to technical people? And I would say you don't. You partner them with people who have the aesthetic sense. Again, it might be the square peg in the round hole. Some people, you can take the time to develop it, but I think it's naive to think that somebody who studies design or art for decades can be replaced by a simple class for an engineer, right? So, aesthetics is deep knowledge, deep understanding, and maybe to some extent a gift, and it's undervalued a lot of times. So for that reason, we always try to include artists in the NextFab community, along with the technologists, and try to have lots of flow of ideas between them. Good question.
Does NextFab develop any of your own machines, or do you pretty much buy them and then you're just developing products?
We have at times gotten into modifying machines or building our own machines. I used to build 3D printers, but what we've found is it's a lot harder to make that a business. Unless you want to sort of do a Kickstarter. It's just a different business, let's say, than what we found our customers really wanted. Our customers want predictable output. They want to be able to achieve certain results in a timely way and a cost-effective way. And prototype equipment, developing new equipment ends up being unreliable and expensive in terms of labor and so on. So for that reason, we don't pursue that anymore.
One of the interesting things I note in all of our presentations and the ideas that we deal with on the other side is a huge dichotomy regarding security of all kinds. The idea side is scared to death from the get-go that everyone will steal their thoughts, their ideas, their brainwaves, their products, their markets, their everything. And yet I've never seen a presentation that included any consideration at all. So I'm looking at the house numbers thinking, well, how are you going to keep people from walking up and going, wang, since one of your requirements is it's easily removed from the wall?
Yeah.
Overall, where does concern about security, privacy, and the sanctity of the idea and the product stream fall here, since no one's ever mentioned it in any of our presentations?
Yeah, I guess I could have talked about liability a little bit more, which I would say is the primary driver for business considerations of security. If somebody steals your house numbers, it's not likely that you're going to blame the manufacturer, right? And the consequences are pretty minimal, in terms of the liability concern for the homeowner. But if somebody, breaks into, secure product, mobile device or something that you produce for the military, and, that's obviously something where you have to take security much more seriously. So I would say it's all driven by that concern for the potential hazard associated with theft. Does that meet or answer your question?
Well, sort of. For example, if those house numbers are so easy to steal, they're going to disappear from walls right and left, and then you won't be able to sell it anymore.
Well,
It's a huge umbrella of concern.
potentially, but and yes, we didn't address that there. Obviously, you could secure them and put a secret way of removing them or something, or a less obvious way of removing them. But if they're getting stolen, presumably they're going to be used as house numbers again somewhere else. So you're still showcasing your product.
Even a stolen product can be put to good use. Anyone else?
Yeah, I had a question about startup companies that you partner with. What sort of is the structure of the partnership that you have with these companies?
Well, when we have invested in the companies, you mean? Okay, the incubator has a couple of different models for supplying services to incubated companies. One is just cash, so a company pays us cash for the services we provide. Another is that if they have some valuation for their company or they're in a funding round where there's a defined valuation, we could take an equity stake, and it's in return for a known value of services. So they get a credit, and then they can use up to that amount of services for that amount of equity that they give to us. So those two models basically define it.
Anybody else? Any other questions? I just want to mention that Evan will be joining us for lunch at Jazz. Those of you who have been here before know that when we wrap up here, we go have a bite to eat. And the question that you forgot to ask him that you'll think of 10 minutes later, you'll still have a chance to ask him. So I want to, and I wish our Abington friends could join us. We'll figure out some other ways to be more inclusive, but at least we've got the live link. And I should also mention that this will be also available on the website. We've taped it, and Mark will be working with our IS&T folks to make sure that it goes up on the web. So any of you that have watched this and you think of somebody that should have seen this presentation, you can send them to the Innovation website, and they can see it on the website as well. Evan, thank you so much again for just a great presentation.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, everyone.